Very strong language, bad behaviour and the odd classic punk song as we look at the lives of the Sex Pistols in Blood on the Turntables.
You thought you'd gotten rid of us, didn't you? But you were wrong, old bean, because we're back with a vengeance.
When Johnny Rotten swore on Tea Time Telly in 1976, the world changed forever.
They're a group called the Sex Pistols, and I'm surrounded now by all of them. It's what?
Nothing, a rude word. Next question.
No. What was the rude word?
Shit.
Was it really? Good heavens. Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty fucker.
What a clever boy.
What a fucking rotter.
Swearing at 6 o'clock would turn the Sex Pistols into the most infamous band on the planet and change the music business forever. For the next year, they stalked the land in an orgy of outrage, while record companies fought to turn their teen rebellion into cold cash. Then the Pistols split, leaving behind a murdered groupie and a dead bassist. But that just began one of the most extraordinary high court battles in the history of music. This is the story of the greatest rock and roll band Britain has ever produced and the bitter fight for the band's millions between the lead singer Johnny Rotten,
Fighting wars here, you know, I'm not a pop star, I'm fighting wars.
and the group's self-declared mismanager, Malcolm McLaren.
I think it's very hard to be bad. I think anyone can be a saint. I think it's the easiest thing in the world.
Their battle would rage for nearly a decade as they fought for the very soul of the Sex Pistols.
Oh, didn't Malcolm invent you? Oh, that makes your blood boil. But it gives you great purpose.
I used people. I perfectly admit they were like the tools of one's trade, like a sculptor uses clay or a painter uses oil paint.
He didn't write the songs, he didn't record the songs, he didn't tour, he didn't play them songs live, he didn't do the interviews, he didn't do nothing. Nothing at all, thank you.
The accusations of being a Svengali, a charlatan, a crook. So, to some extent, all of those accusations are absolutely true.
I want my self-respect and nobody's gonna fucking take it off me, ever. And that's my war.
Well, that's it for tonight. Right.
Britain during the 1970s was rubbish. It had bad music, bad fashion, and there was nothing to do. It was the perfect breeding ground for a revolution. And the revolution would start in a small London shop called Sex, run by art school dropout Malcolm McLaren and his girlfriend at the time, the fashion designer Vivienne Westwood. The war between Johnny Rotten and Malcolm McLaren started in the shop on the first day the two of them met. The Sex Pistols, the band Malcolm was managing, were desperate for a frontman, and Johnny was a regular visitor to the shop.
Vivienne said, "There's a guy, Malcolm, you should check out. He comes in the shop regularly. His name is John." And in walked a guy who I kept looking at, and I thought, well, he's got something about this guy.
Never really got on with him, never knew much about him. You know, there's just some weird little bloke in lace. Black lace, oh, how kinky.
I said, "Do you sing?" He said, "No, only out of tune, like an out of tune violin."
I mean, repulsive, you know.
I said, "Well, do you want to meet a group? Do you want to do something?"
Johnny's audition was unconventional, to say the least.
Gave John what appeared to be a dead shower head, and I said, "Stand at the end of the shop, grab hold of this shower head, and you bloody better look like you're on stage and you're singing this song, and you sing it out loud, if you know what's good for yourself. Otherwise, this guy here, Steve, is going to beat the fucking shit out of you." So I was fucking terrified. And he got hold of this shower head, and on came the song, Alice Cooper's 18. He had this sort of attitude that made him look kind of crippled, vulnerable. I loved it.
Like the rest of the boys in the band, Johnny Rotten was just a teenager when he joined, and with Malcolm as a manager, he was in for a rough ride.
I wanted to fit in and be everybody's friend, but that wasn't to be.
He didn't like the idea of being in the group. He didn't like the group. In fact, he hated the group. He hated them all.
Well, it was bizarre. I mean, they didn't really want to cope with me at all, and I just thought they were not very bright.
Well, the terrible thing that happened between me and Lydon was when Vivian finally saw who actually this John was in the group, she told me I got the wrong guy. I thought, oh my God, what are you talking? So that's not the John I meant. There's another John. And she was right, there was another John. It was a friend of this John's, John Simon Ritchie, otherwise known as Sid Vicious.
Sid's association with the Sex Pistols would lead to the murder of his girlfriend and his own death at the age of 21. But before that would happen, the first lineup of the group was complete, and their home was Malcolm's unusual shop.
This is a house that Jack built, y'all. Remember this house?
Right, they used to make nice, wacky, weird gear, and the only way you'd ever see that anywhere else was sex shops, pervert shops.
Whips, chains, cock rings. We're gonna sell pornography on T-shirts. I'm gonna turn the whole shop into a place that looks like an asylum for sex addicts.
All right, so it was a kind of a cheap thrill to young kids, I suppose.
We're gonna sell rubber.
Malcolm employed 15-year-old Glenn Matlock to work in his shop. Glenn was to play a pivotal role in the story of the Sex Pistols, as it was while working for Malcolm that he met the other two members of the band, guitarist Steve Jones and drummer Paul Cook. Steve and Paul were childhood mates who formed the core of the group years before and were looking for a bass player, when they weren't trying extra from the shop, that is.
Steve and Paul used to come in, and basically I see it as my job to stop them thieving stuff. But I overheard them talking to Malcolm, and Steve wanted to get Malcolm involved. Malcolm's going, well, how far you got then? And Paul said, oh, well, Del, the bass player, never turns up. And I was learning the bass, and I said, well, I play bass. So we got chatting, you know. I was learning to play bass. I had a bass.
Here I had this boy, Glenn, and here was two guys.
And if the group were going to go anywhere, the teenagers needed decent kit to practice with.
It was simply equipment that had been thieved from all over London at various gigs of various homes of appointed rock stars. Keith Richards' house, Brian Ferry's studio, David Bowie's shows, Rod Stewart's house.
Whether by accident or design, with Johnny Rotten on board, the Sex Pistols were complete. They'd found a singer with anger, energy, and a gift with words. Thanks to Steve and Paul, they also had some of the best kit in London, if not the world. So it was time for the boys to do some serious practicing.
And I was in Malcolm McLaren's shop, and I had a melody maker, and there was a little advert, and it said £10 alley, premises to let. What was it? It's £5 a week. Right. I said, Malcolm, look at this. He said, call the bloke up, offer him £1,000 without seeing it. So I called him up, and I said, well, look, I think I called him about the advert, and I think my mate's mad, but he said to offer you £1,000 without seeing it. He said, I think we can talk business. Don't think he ever got his £1,000.
This is Denmark Street, the place the group practiced and lived before they'd ever played live.
Well, it's pretty similar, but we used to keep it. Steve's pub was over there, and I was there.
There'd be a pile of clothes on the floor in Denmark Street, and you just pick up what you can. It was really, really just chop and change. That's all we had.
And contrary to popular belief, the band shaped up into a tight little four-piece. Pink Floyd they weren't, but the Pistols could certainly play.
We were tight. We were rock solid, and nobody could break it. And that's where it won. God, we were a good little war unit. And it was war.
It was a group that really didn't have a centre of command. There was no real leader. The leader was the shop called Sex, and the guy who ran it, me.
The Sex Pistols were about to play live for the first time. It was November 1975, and the venue was St Martin's School of Art.
We ended up playing here because I got voted to be, by default, because nobody else wanted to do it, social secretary. So I came in on the first day of term and booked a gig.
Hello, hello. The gig gave the group a taste of things to come.
Bazooka Joe was supposed to let us use their gear. At the last minute, they decided they wasn't going to let us use it. So they pulled the plugs in us after about 3 numbers, so it ended up in quite a bit of a fist fight.
Within months, we were touring. Within months. Now, that's not cobbled together. That's dedication towards something.
It soon became clear to the group, and Johnny Rotten especially, that Malcolm had very different ideas about the future of the band than they did. The unlikely partnership was already causing friction.
One accusation that can never be given to me is I never, ever, ever attempted the Sex Pistols to look and behave and feel if they was controlled.
I suppose Malcolm might have had a bit of an Andy Warhol complex in that.
In fact, I was programming the absolute opposite, always to appear uncontrollable.
All my creative levels of genius. But he's just fooling himself, ultimately.
And to manipulate disaster.
We never thought we had a hope in hell. Not a hope. Malcolm as a manager. I was joking. Fat chance.
Disaster was fabulous.
It seemed that disaster was catching. Inspired by the Sex Pistols, a small group of like-minded teenagers started what was to become known as the punk movement, and mainstream news started to report on this new, frightening cult.
We're never going to back down.
Susie and the Banshee.
It was like you'd just come out of Rizzler for the day, done it?
Just look at me now. I'm nothing.
Sid Vicious on drums. Steve Spunker on bass. Marco on guitar. And me just doing the vocals.
It's just got a great atmosphere.
All I've ever done is go up on stage and sing what's wrong with the country.
With punk rock in the news, it wasn't long before the record industry became interested. Sniffing money to be made, they wanted a piece of the action. But the Sex Pistols were going to play the industry at its own game and leave chaos and wreck careers in their wake.
Our people in our artists and repertoire department were terribly excited. You know, they'd found the new thing. They'd found something exciting.
EMI were the first company to sign the Sex Pistols. This bastion of British recording artists couldn't possibly have known what they were getting into.
EMI was a very conservative, traditional British company. If you're with that kind of company, you can make more waves in terms of the publicity you're going to get if you kind of look to get publicity.
Less than 2 months after signing the contract with EMI, the Pistols released their first single, Anarchy in the UK, and set about promoting it. On December the 1st, 1976, everything changed for the band. The live broadcast of a popular tea-time programme was to effectively end the career of its anchorman, Bill Grundy, and the Sex Pistols would be propelled onto the front of every newspaper. Britain was brought to a standstill.
A phone call came through, said there's this TV show and there's a limo coming to pick you up in an hour's time. No, we don't want to do that, we're not getting a limo. Oh, all right, I'll tell Melton.
A conscious drive to excite the media was something I was very conscious of all the time.
Phone goes again. Melton says, if you don't come and do this, you won't get your wages this week. What time's it getting here?
I hadn't really ever paid much attention to Bill Grundy, except he always looked like a really bad drunk. And lo and behold, that's what we walked into.
You see, they are as drunk as I am. They are clean by comparison.
Next thing, we're on live TV.
I am told that that group have received £40,000 from a record company. Well, tell me more about it.
Fucking spent it, haven't we? And I've also got to confess a bit. I'd been up for 3 days speeding out of my mind when I walked into that studio. This was not what I needed.
It's what?
Nothing, a rude word. Next question.
No. What was the rude word?
Shit.
Was it really? Good heavens.
And we were goaded. I didn't want to go that way. But then when he asks for it, well, there it is.
Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty bastard.
Go on, again.
You dirty fucker.
What a clever boy.
What a fucking rotter.
Well, that's it for tonight.
And Malcolm just panicked because they're calling the police. So ran out, got in the car, drove off, and they pulled up at a bloody tube station and went, "See you later, John." Oh, fucking great.
After that infamous incident, the editor of the Daily Mirror called me and he said, "Whatever you got, son, just let us know."
Dirty fucker, dirty fucker, dirty fucker.
The Thames television incident was so serious that the chairman of EMI, Sir John Reed, was dragged into the mess, and things were about to go from bad to worse.
I read in the press about it all. They had been on television and they were outrageous. They offended everybody.
I mean, I always recall the conversation on Christmas Eve, and we were talking about the Sex Pistols, and we were discussing the word fuck.
EMI was a huge record company, but it was even bigger in terms of the electronics it developed, some used for military applications.
Well, there was the rumours that they were involved in all kinds of things, and there's lords in there, and you know, it's the establishment par excellence. So yeah, it's a dig in, isn't it?
You had members of the staff from the electronics side writing to the staff newspaper complaining about having a sister company involved in the Sex Pistols.
Dirty fucker.
And then you have my people coming to me or writing the staff paper and saying, "And we don't like being involved with companies on the electronic side who make weapons."
What a fucking rotter.
It was a fiasco. It was the world we weren't prepared to deal with as a band, and Malcolm never really bothered to address that because he was really like up to his own thing, his own like seeing himself as an art object.
You were David and you were going to be pitted against Goliath. Who was Goliath? The engine, so to speak, of this industry, the heart and soul of the EMI Manchester Square head office.
As the Sex Pistols single Anarchy in the UK climbed the charts, it was causing more than just ripples, it was causing an unexpected revolt.
Their records that they had released were quite unacceptable to the average person.
I am an antichrist.
In fact, there were examples of protests from this from all over the place.
That when they meet the Lord Jesus Christ, repent of their sins, and make him Savior, they don't just get purpose for this life, they get purpose for the next.
As protests picked up across the country, more bad news came. The people who were actually making this single were objecting to even handling it.
If a record turned up with an obscenity on it or something really offensive, it was reported. Then the record would be edited.
And when the housewives who worked in EMI's pressing plant heard Anarchy in the UK, they thought it was nothing less than the spawn of the devil.
But the ladies would not test it. They just refused totally.
Well, we had some ladies who didn't want to have anything to do with such awful things.
Oh, they might say something nobody will like. Well, that's my right, isn't it?
With the problems at the pressing plant and the adverse publicity the Sex Pistols were getting, the final straw with EMI happened 35,000 feet above the North Sea with an incident involving vomit.
There on the front of the Daily Telegraph was this story about their abusive attack of the crew on a flight into Amsterdam.
Every newspaper printed that they'd vomited on a ground hostess.
I rang up British Airways direct and I said, "Would you please confirm all this to me? Is this true?" And they told me the whole thing was exactly true.
Of course, it was completely untrue. You know, I went to a lot of trouble to check up on that story. It wasn't true.
They didn't behave, they didn't accept the common rules of decency.
And it was all ending in farce.
John Reed said to me, on stage, they've said, "Fuck the Queen." And I said, no, I don't think that can be right. I don't think they said fuck the Queen. I think they said fuck Queen. I think they meant the pop group.
It's just feeble excuses for getting rid of us. It's just basic fear.
So it was important to take out the poison.
The housewives had won their way. The Sex Pistols were sacked by EMI. But this was publicity you couldn't buy. And if the group weren't infamous already, they were now. After all, they got to keep the money from the advance.
In a way, being fired by EMI, I mean, that just kept the whole story going as far as Malcolm was concerned. So, I mean, he had nothing to lose, really. I mean, I did.
Was Leslie Hill suddenly now walking the walk on the wilder side? And it wasn't long before his head was going to roll.
It was the beginning of the end for me in the record business.
I think he ended up selling carpets in the West Country.
After leaving the record industry, Leslie Hill used his skills in a very different way. He eventually became the chairman of ITV, one of the most powerful jobs in the country. To this day, he's never sold a carpet in his life. Punk was on the rise. The record industry was racing to catch up with the new musical movement and fighting to sign up other groups like The Clash and The Stranglers. But for the Sex Pistols, internal battles were already beginning to tear the band apart.
Glenn Matlock was a promoter of the Beatles and ABBA.
Oh, I weren't a big fan of the Beatles and I weren't a big fan of ABBA, but I appreciated them. ABBA especially, I could appreciate the good bits about certain things.
There was a bitterness and a real hatred of Glenn towards John, and vice versa.
Along with Johnny Rotten, Glenn had worked out the music for most of the Pistols' songs, but the pair were hardly friends, and being a Sex Pistol was making Glenn unhappy.
So the bottom line of it really was Glenn found some of the songs, just the content to be too much for him.
Tensions were running really high. We were all pretty young.
There's a lot of like teenage anger thrown in now. And some very dubious management moves.
Glenn seemed to be too nice, basically. Kept worrying about his mother.
The girls at work started calling her Mrs. Sex Pistol, which didn't go down too well.
And Glenn told us this story when he was looking glum here and there. And of course, hoping to engage sympathy, he got the exact opposite. What he got was a gigantic slap.
Malcolm's this kind of guy who's never happy unless there's some kind of intrigue or something going on, and he was stirring it up.
And when it gets into that, it becomes like Chinese whispers. You don't know what really was said at all in the end.
Nobody really fired him. He was being pushed into a corner and they were testing to see if he was going to leap.
And I had a meeting right at the end and they said, can't you just get on with John? And I said, well, no, I'm not going to pretend. I thought either back me up or I don't care.
Tried to sort this out since, but the problem is he said, she said.
Glenn Matlock, who'd been with the Sex Pistols from the days of the King's Road and Denmark Street, was still a teenager. And his decision to lead the biggest band in the country wasn't an easy one to make.
You know, it's not as though it had been 2 weeks long up to then. It had been the best part of 2 years. Did it hurt? I don't know if it hurt. I mean, there's an expression, more trouble than it's worth.
For Glenn, it was over.
He had other ideas. He thought, listen, I wrote all the songs, I wrote all the music. Absolutely true, Glenn. He did, because he was the only guy who was willing to do any work. Rotten, of course, scribbled a few lyrics, which were great. And that's why the Sex Pistols didn't ever write anything very much after Glenn departed.
He's in a bad position, isn't he, Glenn, because he left and then Sid came in, and let's face it, Sid's talents were limited.
After missing the King's Road audition, Sid Vicious finally got his chance to join the Sex Pistols. As Johnny Rotten's best mate, he was perfect, except he couldn't play the bass.
He didn't have to learn to play anything, that wasn't a problem. But to deliberately not bother was a problem.
I'd like to have fun. Any kind of fun, just fun. That's my object in life.
It was too much, really, and wrong to bring him into that band at that point and throw him into that. We weren't taking on board that he'd read all that press and, you know, and what that meant to him. We were doing to him really what Malcolm did to us.
Sid had bought the myth: sex, drugs and rock and roll. The rock and roll part was easy, and it was a legendary groupie who supplied the sex and drugs.
Sid came into the group on a dreadful day when a girl arrived from New York.
And the girl was the infamous Nancy Spungen.
You're really the star Sid nonsense, you know. And that would be Nancy to Sid.
She was an untold, ferocious groupie, almost like a piranha looking for Dick.
I introduced Nancy to Sid, and I didn't, because I didn't like her. I didn't know he'd, like, go for it.
And afterwards felt he'd fucked the groupie of all time, and he was ready, he was rock and roll. And so, as far as he was concerned, he was actually more cool than John. He'd done the deed.
Nancy soon got Sid hooked on heroin, and Malcolm acted fast to protect what he saw as his new star.
At one point, I hired a private dentist, and we sedated him for at least 3 hours.
Malcolm thought she was bad for him. It's like more likely they were bad for each other.
I hired my road manager to kidnap Nancy and get her on a plane to New York.
You can't interfere in people's private lives. If they're going to go astray, they're going to go astray.
She managed to smash open the back doors and scream at the nearest policeman. Sex Pistols, kidnapped! I'm being kidnapped!
The Sex Pistols had a new lineup and were hunting for their next record contract. The deal was to come within weeks of being fired from EMI, from A&M, home of some of the most influential artists of the 1970s. An unofficial press conference to announce the deal was organised by Malcolm outside Buckingham Palace, which was followed by an official press conference at a smart London hotel. It was a real eye-opener for Derek Green, the man responsible for signing the group, sitting behind them while they fielded questions.
I'm not easily shocked. I've been in rock and roll a long time, but I was really caught by surprise. You know, they just threw drinks, spat, whatever at the journalists in the front, and how intimidated the world's media was by it. They were literally intimidated. They didn't want to ask questions.
The Sex Pistols' time with A&M would become legendary for being one of the shortest in the history of rock and roll, and Derek Green was about to have his world turned upside down.
The signing of the Pistols was clearly a very personal crusade. The firing of them was even more personal.
On the strength of the demo tape, Derek had agreed to sign the group without first meeting them, and just hours before he did, there was another surprise for him.
Malcolm then said that, of course, it's not Glenn Matlock, he's out the band. I was just flabbergasted. Well, who's come in? He said, it's Sid Vicious. And I said, well, what does he play like? It's my first thought. You know, he's a good player. He said, well, he can't.
For a company like A&M, this was an amazing admission because it usually dealt with real musicians. Musicians like Rick Wakeman, dexterous-fingered wizard of the Moog organ.
The music scene in the mid-70s was probably at its healthiest as far as I was concerned. The album sales were absolutely astonishing and we were just having a whale of a time.
But the clock was ticking for the golden-haired prog rocker because sharing a label with the Sex Pistols was gonna prove fatal to his career.
On the day that they were signing, I sent a telex to Derek Green, which went along the lines of, congratulations on signing the Pistols. Next time I see you, I hope you'll have at least 20 safety pins dangling from various orifices. You know, all the best, Rick, something like that.
Derek had single-handedly decided to sign the group to his label, but within hours of doing so, he was having second thoughts.
Went home that weekend And I suppose the whole stress and combination and learning of all these attitudes was playing heavily on me. I think it was the Saturday I got a call from a very nice manager, American in town, who managed Bob Harris, actually.
It's a compilation album. The tracks are a selection of some of the nicest things that we've had on the programme over the last couple of years.
Whispering Bob Harris presenting one of the most famous and influential television programmes about music of all time, the Old Grey Whistle Test, even though he had a beard.
6 Wives of Henry VIII.
He told me about an incident at the Speakeasy with good old Whispering Bob Harris, lovely man that he is, where he was truly shaken up by him.
Bob and his entourage had been involved in a fight with Sid and his mates. The incident was the final straw for Derek.
It bothered me. And then the Monday I was going towards the office, driving my usual route, and I stopped by, picked up my A&R director, who was also my friend. Instead of going to the office, we drove, and I drove, and we got to Brighton. And we sat down on the beach of Brighton. I was throwing some pebbles in the sea with him, and I said, Mike, I'm bothered, so I've made a mistake. And that's when as I threw these stones, I realised that just made a personal mistake. That seemed quite simple. Something had to go, which was basically me or the Pistols.
Derek called his boss across the Atlantic in America and offered his resignation, but he'd been with the company through many successful years and it wasn't accepted, so the Pistols had to go. They'd been with the label just 7 days.
Next thing I heard, it's all going horribly wrong.
We met, I think it was at noon, all rather dramatic, round the table, and I had a pre-prepared press statement which said A&M press release, and it said A&M fires the Sex Pistols. And I just passed this piece of paper around the table, looked at Malcolm and said, this meeting is just to fill in the gap, which is called how much?
Was it 7 days? Oh, that's not bad, is it?
Getting fired after 7 days and keeping the money from the advance again got the Pistols even more publicity. But for Rick Wakeman there was trouble because someone somewhere had seen the telex he'd sent to Derek Green. There were to be no more gold lame capes at A&M. The sacking made the news and Rick got the blame.
Somebody came into the studio and said, have you seen this? Pistols have been dropped by A&M due to pressure from Richard Carpenter in America and me in England, who said that if they stayed on the label, we were off. It took me about a day before I got through to A&M, and I asked to speak to Derek Green. He's gone away. He's gone away. He's gone away. Well, when will he be back? Not for at least 6 months.
When I went off from that meeting, I literally ran, and I went no particular destination other than to hide.
Talk about never mind the bollocks, I've been kicked in them.
Derek Green hadn't made up the story about Rick, but no one knew who did.
And I walked out of there, now with a career in tatters and also no contract.
Yeah, you thought you'd gotten rid of us, didn't you? But you were wrong, old bean, because we're back with a vengeance.
God save the Queen, my son.
By now, the Sex Pistols were desperate to put out an album, and they managed to do that with the third and final record company they signed to, Virgin.
Virgin and Richard Branson was hilarious because that was hippie citadel #1. I never trusted hippies, and he was one of these dreadful public school ones. But he was prepared to take us on, and so I thought, that's all right, you know. I never really liked him. I never really liked anything about him or those that worked with him. Power mad. Power mad. A bit Malcolm-y, actually. A bit Malcolm-y, Branson.
The signing with Virgin meant that the Sex Pistols could finally release the album they'd been working on. It was called Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols.
Virgin at first loved it because Branson was all over putting the posters on all over his stores.
There was a sense that somebody, somewhere, was going to declare this kind of work bad behaviour, and it shouldn't be an album that should be on such display.
A Virgin record store manager was taken to court under an indecency law which dated from 1899. It was claimed the window display in his shop was inflicting the album onto an unsuspecting public. It was bollocks, in other words.
And that's why the word bollocks was taken to court. And thank you, Richard, because he backed us on that. We proved it was a true and correct word, as indeed fuck and cunt are. It's there. Everybody uses this language. How on earth can it be banned?
Actually, I think, looking back on it now, if it had been declared illegal, blasphemous, actually at the time I would have preferred it.
Virgin and the Sex Pistols won the case after proving that the word bollocks had a proud history and was even ancient Anglo-Saxon slang for a clergyman. But Malcolm wasn't interested, feeling it was a fight for Virgin and not himself or the band. This attitude was to drive another wedge between him and Johnny Rotten.
But Malcolm didn't show. And after that, we went to a Nottingham radio station, and that's when I dedicated a Cliff Richard song to the no-show McLaren. It's not funny, we don't talk anymore. Excellent. Please play it. It's still one of my faves.
It's so funny how we don't talk.
The record went on to sell truckloads and inadvertently make Virgin, which is the one thing that grated against me, look vaguely hip. That was the thing that I just felt dreadful about.
The Sex Pistols released their first single with Virgin called God Save the Queen to coincide with the Queen's Jubilee Week. It was immediately banned from many high street stores. But something even more sinister was happening. MI5, the British Secret Service, were watching.
This is the MI5 building. This is where I worked from 1994 to 1996. It's responsible for stopping terrorism and espionage and subversion in the UK.
A lot of the hardcore anarchist groups in Paris did actually praise at one point the fact that they thought God Save the Queen was virtually their record.
Looking down this enormous list of files, I happened to see a file called Subversion in Contemporary Music, dated 1977. Seeing the date and seeing the title of the file, I thought this was quite interesting.
It surprises me how governments waste money, all right? And investigating a pop band is really, really, really childish and ludicrous, and it shows that there's something fundamentally wrong with this country.
What it had on it, basically, was details of the Sex Pistols. Most of it was taken from press clippings, mainly from Time Out, I have to say. But there was some information that was gleaned from secret sources, like telephone taps and so on.
I remember setting up in a pub with these Russian journalists and some of their friends, which I'm certain were part of the members of the KGB.
You could imagine this kind of crusty old colonel hearing the lyrics to God Save the Queen, or the lyrics to Anarchy in the UK, and thinking, my God, this is the end of civilization as we know it in Britain.
It doesn't make for a very happy visa life, I'll tell you that. I don't care, they can monitor me all they like, they can look at my bum as much as they so deserve. All right? They'll get nothing but a fart out of it. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Well, there's not enough problems in this country, you've got to be bothering about silly pop band. Or were we so silly? You see, there's the thing. I was hitting it right, wasn't I?
When God Save the Queen was released, it obviously went to #2 in Silver Jubilee Week. Now, we've all thought for many years that they were in some ways novel, that they really should have been #1. And I think that in 1977, it was just too much. It was just too embarrassing, too much of a kick in the face to the monarchy and what Britain is supposed to stand for them to accept it as #1 at the time.
If the listener doesn't like what they interpret the meaning to be, that's their decision, and they're more than welcome to that opinion. But you cannot stop someone saying what they want to say. You can stop yourself listening.
And from what I know now of the establishment, from working on the inside and from seeing it on the outside when I've annoyed them, I know that they will do things like that.
That's like superiority. We have the right to stop you because we think. Well, we think differently.
This is First Cut is the deepest.
Although the single God Save the Queen shot up the charts, it was Rod Stewart who stole the #1 slot during Jubilee week. God Save the Queen caused such a storm that questions were even raised in Parliament about the group, and the call from certain MPs that they should be hung from Traitors' Gate rang throughout the halls of British democracy.
That was actually seriously discussed in Parliament. That's an achievement, I'm thinking. You know, at the time it weren't. That was, oh my God, where am I going to go?
With nothing less than a call for state-sponsored assault, the Sex Pistols may not have been hung, but they certainly couldn't play anywhere.
I will do everything I can to prevent certain groups, whom I do not propose to name on this programme, from ever appearing in London again. What's wrong with that?
We have had punk rock in Birmingham, unfortunately.
We've had 2 applications in recent times. One was from the Sex Pistols.
I want to make it clear, however, that it's not a question of an MI5 blacklist, it's simply a question of acquiring information.
We decided that on this occasion we would refuse the application.
The decision was made when we discovered it was mere children that would be watching the performance.
Have you been to a punk rock
concert? Yes, we've had them in. I've been. I know what I'm talking about.
The consequences of having nowhere to play were disastrous. The group was literally being chased out of Britain, but a deal with Warner Brothers Records meant a trip to America to promote the album.
Warner Brothers Records wanted us to go and play in the major cities like New York. I decided, no, it's too crass, it's too stupid.
Couldn't play England's, because there was nowhere left to play. Europe was out. Head to the States, maybe that'll pull us together.
Oh, let's go south, 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 south.
We don't do the easy venues up north, we go down south, right? Where bands don't tour. And where are the gigs? They're rodeo clubs, aren't they, and cowboy bars. They're all clever, this.
Malcolm's decision to play redneck clubs in America's Bible Belt was guaranteed to cause trouble.
And there was 2 guys there dressed like Vietnam guerrillas. Military fatigues, the ubiquitous American shades. These 2 guys, all they ever did was open up their guns and pull them back together. So Sid started to misbehave. One of these guys literally picked him up, almost by his throat, with one hand. Bounced his head on the roof and bounced him back down again. We got to Memphis, sheriff got on stage. And they say, I want you to look out. I decided, here's my SWAT team. And there were guys, I decided a PA with guns pointed at the stage. Now you tell me if there's ever been a rock and roll concert like that.
The gigs were great, right up towards the last 2. I really enjoyed it, a lot.
If this is what the American youth look up to, if this is what they believe in, then we're in sad shape.
It didn't go violent, it went the opposite way. It went great, they liked us.
The entire audience just rained, non-stop, garbage.
I really thought that was quite something for a bunch of spotty little kids to be taking that on.
And Sid said, the worst thing, all you cowboys are a bunch of faggots.
It worked, we did fine, but off stage, it was already gone. It was just all vanishing off to your own areas.
On January the 14th, 1978, the group played their last ever concert in San Francisco.
Sadly, in San Francisco, when the band boarded the stage, they didn't care about each other at all, and they literally everybody played a different song, all at the same time. It was a phenomenal cacophony.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
Rotten left the group. As the singer and main songwriter, this should have been the end of the band. But Malcolm had other ideas and wanted to manipulate the situation so they could carry on without him.
And I didn't know what to do. I'd already designed the idea of making a movie. I designed the idea of recording another album. But I didn't think we had necessarily the group intact.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? You're dead right, I felt cheated. Felt cheated big time.
Malcolm started to make a Sex Pistols movie and soundtrack, which was to be called The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Johnny Rotten refused to have anything to do with either project. The idea for the film was to tell the story of how Malcolm had created the Sex Pistols, a band that couldn't play, and had swindled his way to the top, the true history of the band being replaced with a fictional account of their rise to fame.
I'll be the Svengali. I'll dictate the 10 commandments of how you swindle your way to the top.
A group that can't play is better than a group that can.
Malcolm manipulated it into a fiasco. He cut off all the hard edges, took out the bollocks, watered it down and softened it up. A cream puff is what he presents to the world then.
Refusing to have anything to do with the group, Johnny Rotten wanted his share of the money from the sales of their records, money he wasn't being paid.
Rotten demanded £75,000. And so the deal was, well, if you give Rotten £75,000, that's the end of it. I was kind of happy to do that. My lawyer thought it was too expensive. Don't pay it, get on. Force Rotten to be in this movie, no matter what.
Hello, no, this isn't right. This is true. Sent camera crews to Jamaica to film it from behind bushes. Now, yeah, they don't need me, they don't acknowledge me, they don't accept I was anything to do with this band at all. Why are you filming me? Without my permission? Still continuing that cheeky fucking attitude.
McLaren was faced with the unusual problem of trying to complete an album and film with a band, but no lead singer.
Well, we'll record one record with Ronnie Biggs. We'll make him the lead singer, and we'll record another with Sid. And then we delivered it to Virgin.
How can you like it? There's nothing in it. That is a con. That is a swindle. I've always thought so.
People thought the thing was becoming very pantomimic. It looked a bit like a comedy show now. Meanwhile, the wolves were gathering at the door. The record companies were pushing and pushing and pushing, and then Sid went to New York, and then a terrible thing happened.
On the 12th of October 1978, screams and loud bangs could be heard from room 100 of New York's Chelsea Hotel. Police found the blood-stained body of Sid's girlfriend, Nancy, slumped beneath the bathroom sink.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain.
Got this call from the Sun newspaper. Is John Beverly, is that the same as Sid Vicious? I said, yeah, he's just been arrested on murder.
Sid was let out on bail, paid by Malcolm McLaren and using money earned by the Sex Pistols, even though Malcolm wasn't actually managing Sid at the time.
It was meant to happen. Nancy always said she'd die before she was 21.
It's never been proved whether Sid murdered Nancy or not, but whatever the truth, he was soon going to follow her to the grave.
What would you like to happen now over the next, say, year or two?
I'd like to have fun.
Band didn't want to know. That was one of the greatest tragedies. They just didn't want to know, and I thought, well, perhaps what we should do, if we do anything at all, was to actually find him the best possible trial lawyer we can.
And the lawyer had some interesting thoughts to change Sid's image.
And he said, get Sid, you think you could get him jogging a little bit? We can take some photos. And if he's going to date anybody, let him date someone like a librarian. What about buying him a dog?
Sid Vicious died of a heroin overdose on the 2nd of February 1979. He was 21. It's generally accepted that the drug was supplied to Sid by his mother, herself a user. These notes are thought to be the last things he ever wrote.
He got it wrong. He got it wrong. He needed the drug thing to hide his own lack of self-esteem. I miss the silly sausage, but Jesus, he really went at that so wrong and made such foolish moves. In a way, I resent him for it. I resent him wasting his life.
Many speculations and conspiracy theories have been cast over Nancy's murder and Sid's death, but whatever the truth is, Sid and Nancy had lived the myth. and tragically secured their place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Sex Pistols were now well and truly dead as a band, and Johnny Rotten had already initiated legal proceedings against Malcolm McLaren. The hearing began just 5 days after Sid's death. The case was really a fight for the truth, for the control over the Sex Pistols' back catalogue, and for the group's missing earnings.
And this is a serious court case. It's about money and corruption and vast amounts of cash being filtered off into other projects which are not necessarily musical.
We hadn't really prepared for this so-called court case. We've been negligible in that regard. We quickly tried to get some affidavits from various people.
The case from Malcolm's side was absolutely insanely childish. It started out with, it was basically scurrilous personal attacks. You know, from the likes of Vivian Westwood. I never liked him anyway. This has nothing to do with it. If you don't like me, fine, but hands off, what's mine, right? Hello, I wrote those songs, not you. I was absolutely up for it. I don't lie, see? I got nothing to worry about here. I've already had, like, my wallet nicked, right? I just want it back.
I was sort of vaguely amused by this, you know. This started out as a wonderful gag. Now I was in court with, and I'm being accused of having manipulated and perpetrated this enormous fraud.
I have brought you many things in my time, but the most successful of all was an invention of mine they called the punk lock.
Running around pretending he invented us. He invented me? I don't think so.
Meanwhile, Rotten's lawyers were portraying him as this white knight, this poor, undernourished kid who'd been taken off by this man, manipulated to join a group with the sole intention of robbing this industry of this, that, and the other.
And there was a huge tax bill that was not taken care of.
But McLaren had a problem. The great rock and roll swindle not only described how he defrauded the record industry, but Johnny Rotten as well.
Why did the Sex Pistols break up on the brink of being a successful rock and roll band?
Why? Because we seized our chance in San Francisco to frame the singer, leaving him with the contracts and us with the money.
And if that was lumbered on me, I mean, what else tax would come my way that I'd be responsible for but not actually earning on? It's unacceptable. Really, really nasty-minded.
The script of the great rock and roll swindle was used as part of the evidence in the case and was given to the judge to read.
He announced he didn't know whether he was being had, that it was a comedy, or whether it was true. If he was being had, it wasn't bad. But if it was true, it was an absolute criminal act.
As the days passed, it started to become clear that things were going badly for Malcolm.
They had all these quotes in the press that they particularly garnered to paint even a darker. This man, almost the evilest man who ever walked the planet, was now standing in front of you, virtually Lucifer himself. And I thought, well, that's not a bad way to go, really.
I was more than prepared to go in any witness box and say whatever needed to be said, but you know who didn't.
And on the final day, when I knew there was going to be a judgment, I caught a taxi to the Midland Bank on Oxford Street, where the account was. Amount of money. I put it in my pockets, all over me. I was like a walking paper of the Queen. Fabulous way to drift out of this goddamn island.
Just stop the fucking spitting. I don't like being spat at.
The Sex Pistols are even more famous now than they were in the 70s. Their records are constantly being updated and remixed for a new generation. For a brief period, punk changed the landscape of Britain and the world of music. It proved that anyone could be in a rock and roll band, something that's still with us today. But for Malcolm and Johnny, old wounds can't be changed so easily.
He's never been asked to explain that court case at all, has he? He's never ever been challenged on it.
They felt that I had truthfully become Lucifer. I was this devil. I had gone too far. I was insane. I'm not.
Very noticeable, poignant moment in his life, I would think, you know?
After 8 years of legal wrangling, the cash and Johnny Rotten had won his war.
His name really should never have come up after it, ever again, as having any relevance or importance. I lost you, bastard.
Rotten always was a good boy, trying desperately hard to be a bad boy.
I've not borrowed, stolen, nicked, put my name on something it don't belong to.
He's a nice boy, a good boy.
Yeah, that can make me difficult to work with, but those are my standards.
It's very hard to be bad. I struggle to be bad. It's hard, but it's worthwhile in the end.
So you don't see there being any reconciliation with Malcolm after all these years?
That would imply there was a friendship in the first place.
May I make this point? We seem to have got on to discussing whether punk rock is good music. Now, I don't actually give a damn whether anybody thinks it's good music or bad music.
Let's just say business as usual.